Well, when I picked a topic for this week, this is the headline I saw. Not much of a headline, really, in small type on Drudge, but here's what it said. Trans actor scuffles with Trump supporter on street. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. This is your Right Angle brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Guys, when I saw that headline, trans actor scuffles with Trump supporter on street, the second I read that, without giving it any conscious thought at all, this is almost a genuinely a knee-jerk kind of a psychological reaction. I said to myself, I made a bet with myself. And can anybody guess what that bet might have been?
Well, you told us in the backstage, so...
All right, so in that case, so folks at home, my bet was I'd be willing to bet you that the Trump supporter didn't start it. Let's cut to the tape.
Oh my. This is personal property, sweetheart.
You guys are fans of my show, and we don't want fans of your show.
Oh my.
Hey,
oh my God.
Well, it looks like I win the $64,000. It turns out, if you can only imagine my surprise, that in a case of physical violence out on the street between members of the tolerant progressive left that encompasses all points of view and the evil, racist, homophobic, transphobic, Islamophobic, patriarchal Trump supporter, that once again, it's the liberal that did it, basically. Scotty, let's start with you. What kind of a social environment do you think it takes for people to simply assume that they can walk up to somebody's private property and simply destroy it or carry it away because they don't agree with it? What is the environment that produces that level of audacity and pathology?
This is the kind of thing I think that is so difficult for people on the right to understand. I'm not saying all people on the right. I'm sure there are bad actors who've engaged in violent acts for good reason or for no reason. But I think by and large, the conservative movement has a hard time understanding why someone would do that. As we talked about on our backstage show, it was difficult for me to imagine how bad something would have to be on a sign that somebody was holding before I would go up and deprive them of it or even say anything to them. You know,
what would it take?
It would literally have to be it wouldn't even be an insult about me personally. It would have to be an attack on my family.
It'd be about your wife, wouldn't it?
On my blood relatives,
right.
Or those with whom I have engaged in a covenantal relationship. Yes, my wife. And so that's why it is so fundamentally hard for us to understand this. First of all, we can't imagine ourselves doing it. We can't imagine why anybody else would do it. And when we see somebody who's advocating for something that we find abhorrent or which we find repulsive or to which we vigorously object, my tendency is to think, well, we've got some work ahead of us. We've got to figure out a way to reach that guy. How do we break through that sort of mental noise and cloud that he's constructed around himself and be able to connect with him with the truth about something? It makes me think that we've been ineffective. Like I look into my own side and how is it possible in a country like this with so many years of putting out messages like we have here and others have elsewhere, that there are still people in this country who are thinking so incorrectly about the fundamental nature of humanity and of this constitutional republic. And so it's kind of a reflective moment for me when I see that. Or at the worst case scenario, is there anything that I could say now to this person that might have an opportunity to get him to open the door a crack and think just for a moment? Not to meet him with aggression, even though he is displaying aggression, if it or she is displaying aggression, but to meet him with a question that raises some doubt in their mind and gets them to do their own research, which is, by the way, how I came about my own set of beliefs, having been on the other side for so long.
I saw something very similar to this online, although I don't think it was a Trump poster. It may have been a pro-life poster where a college student, might have been in Oregon, I'm not sure, but it was a West Coast progressive. She simply took the sign and started running with it, just took it and started walking off with it. And she was grabbed by a cop. And he said, "What are you doing with that man's private property?" I was just moving it. It's just, she was astonished. Astonished. That was the main thing, was that she was surprised and shocked that this was actually happening to her. That this was somehow illegal. It's crazy. Steve, I decided to save the landmine for you. You're usually pretty liquored up, and you can take these things better than most. There gets to be some shoving involved, and I think this is actually a serious point. I'm not just saying it to be provocative. I think it needs to be discussed. So you've got a trans actor, a man who's transitioned into a woman as far as they're concerned. And this person then starts a physical altercation with you and basically starts taking your stuff, and pushing and shoving goes along. I'm inclined to want to say, my dad told me you never hit a lady, but that's no lady. What about that? I mean, do trans people, do male who transitions into female deserve or should get the kind of physical restraint that most males at least used to be taught when dealing with violence in terms of males versus females?
Yeah, I've had this conversation with my older son, who's 13 now. Well, not this conversation, but a related tangential conversation, which is never get in a physical fight with a woman. If you win, right, you're a jerk. If you lose, you're a wuss. Also, you're the guy, and you're supposed to be better than that, because you've got this manly virtue. You're supposed to protect women and children, not fight women and children. That's just not what you do. But when I see some of the women competing in weightlifting and wrestling and track competitions across the nation, that gets all turned on its head, doesn't it? Men are stronger. Men who have had certain surgeries and whatnot are still stronger, and for all intents and purposes, you're still a man. I will address you as her or she or whatever your personal pronoun is of choice, just to be polite. But no amount of make-believe can turn a Y chromosome into an X. It doesn't happen. Years of being bigger and stronger do not suddenly go away because you put on a dress. And that's all there is to it. I hate to say this because I believe in peaceful protest, but in that situation, I'm afraid we're just going to have to start giving as good as we get. I don't want to initiate anything. No. Not one dang thing, because it's a bad road. We don't want to go down that. But I think the days of being quietly victimized by this have got to come to a very quick end. Otherwise, it's going to escalate, and people are going to get killed. And I would much rather nip this in the bud with a one-sided street
consequences.
Scuffle. Exactly. Than I would like to see the left continue to escalate. That said, I'd now like to briefly answer the question you gave to Scott, which is this. None of this comes as a surprise. Leftism is based on the premise that some people are simply better than others and have the legal right to take things away from lesser people in order to do with what they will. And when we deny them the legal means to do what is theirs by right, by doing things by, like, electing Republicans to the White House, then it becomes incumbent on them to do this sort of thing in their free time. So no, I'm not surprised at all. Robert Heinlein once described a mugger as a freelance socialist. And there you have it.
To me, the issue is, what is it about modern leftism that causes people to react with physical violence, not to a God hates transsexuals kind of thing, but just the statement of a candidate from the other party? It's not news that Donald Trump is president. It's not news that he's running for office in 2020. What would cause somebody to get physically violent about that? What causes somebody to assault people who are sitting in a restaurant wearing a MAGA hat? What causes all of this? In the segment we talked about earlier on this week's show, what causes high school to blur out the MAGA hats on a yearbook photo? Why? Why does this have to be picked up, ripped up, destroyed, taken away, and if you have to use physical violence for it, then that's what you do. Why? There is, I think, a sound analogy here. It is my belief, and I don't think this is much beyond dispute, that a great deal of progressivism is involved in magical thinking, which is stronger than wishful thinking. If this person claims that he's a woman, identifies as a woman, then he should be allowed to run in the race with other women. And if he beats the competition by 2 seconds in the 400-meter dash, then that's just the price we pay for having things be what we want them to be. In the presence of that kind of philosophy, and it applies to economics, applies to everything else. It's true because I believe it to be true. Any kind of evidence that goes contrary to that belief system doesn't just upset you, it destroys your entire belief system. And all of your friends believe the same way, and if you were to start thinking differently, those friends wouldn't be with you anymore. That's why it's so monolithic, this kind of thing. And the best analogy I can think of this, it's a little self-serving, but I actually think it works. And that's simply this. The reason they react so strongly to any evidence of something other than what they believe in is because it represents light that illuminates something in their head, some kind of contradiction or something. And the most amazing thing about the world, and nobody really thinks about this too much, so I would advise you to dwell on this next time you get depressed. But there's no such thing as a darkness generator. As a matter of fact, there's no such thing really as darkness at all. There is such a thing as light, and the absence of light is darkness, but darkness is not a force. It's not something you can just turn on or put in. And if you imagine the entire universe, billions and billions and billions of light years across, if you imagine that giant shell of a universe with all the stars gone out and all the galaxies gone out and every source of light completely gone out, and smack dab in the center of the universe, you light a birthday candle, it's not dark anymore. It's not terribly brightly lit, but it's not dark anymore. And this is the essence of why that candle has to be extinguished. The presence of it causes so much psychological disturbance, so much physical discomfort in the people who are the most extreme in these beliefs, that to simply be confronted with somebody who disagrees with them on something is to void their entire personality, all of their friendships, what they work their life on, what they believe, all of it. There's nothing you could tell me that would make me abandon the principles I have, because they're tried principles. But if God were to come down from heaven and to stand in front of me and say, Bill, you're absolutely wrong. Liberalism is 100% the way to go, and you've made a terrible mistake. You know what I'd do? I'd become a liberal. That's what I would do. But short of that, we have to be careful out there. This is not a rational thing. It is an emotional reaction. It's getting more and more common every day. It's getting stronger every day. Conservative speakers have to go with tremendous physical security now. Their lives are in physical danger. And that's because wearing a MAGA hat is not a statement of Donald Trump. That's not how it's seen. Wearing a MAGA hat is seen by these people who do these assaults as evidence that this giant house of cards that they've constructed for themselves isn't actually real. And that's why it becomes a life or death thing for them emotionally. And when people are dealing with life or death issues, they will get violent. And since politics is not a life or death issue for us, and neither is our philosophy, put up whatever idiotic nonsense you want to put up. It doesn't affect me. I know what I believe. If you want to change my mind, convince me. But just the presence of these things causes people to get violent. So I think that explains it. And the two things I would leave you with is, number one, be careful. It doesn't mean be quiet. It just means be careful. And the second thing is, it's nice to be on the side of the birthday candle. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. This program is made possible by the paying members of BillWhittle.com, a small group of people who part with $9.95 a month to make sure that no one can put out this light. No one. There's nothing YouTube or Facebook or anything can do to stop these messages coming out, because a small group of people have the generosity and the vision and the patriotism to make sure that they keep coming. And we need more of you. So if If you're one of those people who are watching the show and you can become a member, if you have the means to do it, we'd really appreciate it. Link is down below. And we will see you next week on Right Angle.